I think part of the plan is to escalate, and then all of a sudden we have a genuine powder keg that's going to explode. And that's the pretext for martial law. That's what my fear is.
The United States military is not trained or equipped to be law enforcement. That's not our mission. It's never been our mission, because that is a very slippery slope to an all-out monarchy.
All right, you all know what's going on. Trump has deployed the military into Washington, D.C. and taken over the city. So Mom and I thought we'd bring on a former Marine to tell us just how worried we should be. Let's get into it. Hi, Mom.
Hello, child.
So normally we would dive into the topic, but these aren't normal circumstances, so we brought in reinforcements. So today we have Matt with us. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Thanks
Hello,
for having me.
Matt.
Hello.
So, Mom, we're talking about Trump's takeover of D.C. today, and you reached out to Matt because you wanted the perspective of someone who served in the military. Matt's a veteran. Why don't you tell us your initial reactions to this takeover and why specifically you wanted to talk to Matt about it?
So I want to give you a little bit of background, Matt, and I'm really happy that you're here and we can talk to you because your perspective is so important. So I grew up in the 50s and 60s as an anti-communist zealot. I swear to God, every day I was afraid, like a lot of people in my generation who still are afraid, that I would wake up and there would be foreign troops marching down the streets of American cities. And it would be because there was going to be an overthrow of the government and the communists were going to install a dictator. I mean, a lot of people that I knew thought that this was going to happen right away. But people like me who were in the anti-communist movement and who were we consider ourselves in the know, knew that the commies were going to play this long game, that you couldn't do troops in the cities first. That was going to come last, that they were going to put their pieces in place first. And then by the time the troops were in the cities, the takeover would be complete. And it was kind of like the commies were going to play this game of chess, and they were going to position all of their pieces, and they were going to do it slowly and methodically, so slowly that most people would not notice. And then, checkmate. You know, they were going to do even like small things, like take books out of libraries, especially military libraries. They were going to take over the government slowly by election. And then they were going to turn the might of the federal government and all of its monies to put their enemies in prison, to silence the press, to keep their propaganda networks going, to fire all of the good people in government and replace them with their stooges. So then, when all of that's put together, one day you wake up and there are troops in an American city. And you think, how did this happen? But this has been going on for decades. I mean, Donald Trump grew up in the same city at the same time that I did, and he knows what this is like. And when you put troops into a city, a couple of things happen. Number one, if you do it in a low-key kind of way and people don't react, because mostly people don't care about what doesn't impact them. And you get used to it. And you say, troops in American cities, it's not so bad. Nothing happened. And then you do it again and you escalate it a little bit until finally you're in a situation where it's a powder keg and all it takes is a match. And I mean, you see this over and over in history, right? You got soldiers on one side and citizens on another, and somebody fires a gun or a firecracker goes off, or somebody's just nervous and the shooting starts. And now you have exactly what you want, the pretext for martial law. So I'm really interested in your perspective as a Marine. What do you think of that? You think I'm way off base here?
Oh, no. It's the frog in the pot analogy. You know, you slowly raise the temperature of that water so they don't realize they're being boiled alive. And the water is rolling at a rolling boil right now, and we're still sitting in the pot. The agenda is to continue to slowly raise the temperature of the water
Yeah.
by systematically introducing the population of the United States to
Yes.
this idea that it's not a big deal.
Right.
It's not a big deal. I
Right.
mean, look, LA was a thing. We sent active duty Marines to LA. It's not a big deal. We've got the National Guard in DC and the federal, law enforcement, ATF, and the Metro Police all working under not a big deal. It's not really going to
Right.
affect you. You don't live in DC. They're
Right.
not even a state, you know? Everybody should be concerned about what they're seeing in DC right now. Everybody, left, right, there's no center. Left or right, you're either concerned by what you're seeing or you are complicit in what's happening. And there is no middle ground. There can't be when you're talking about
Sure.
things like this. There can't be well, let me find this happy medium here where we don't have as many military personnel, patrolling the streets, but we don't get rid of all of them. That's not how this is supposed to work. This is
No.
not normal.
The takeover of the government that I was talking about started as early as the 50s, but it
Mhm.
wasn't the Russians that were doing it. It was the capitalists. It was the
Oh, yeah.
right wing.
Mhm.
It was the corporations who were losing the war because the middle class was getting stronger and stronger, and they saw that their profits were getting smaller and smaller. And so they knew that they had to get a wedge between the working class and their own
Mhm.
interests. And so, for the last 50 years, the main mover of this slow motion takeover that ended up in Project 2025 were right-wing think tanks and
Mhm.
right-wing strategists. And isn't it interesting that now it melds so wonderfully with the same agenda that we thought that the commies had all along?
Oh yeah, no, it absolutely is a crony capitalism kind of takeover. And that's something that I always point out too, is that Russia is not a communist nation. They are an unfettered capitalist nation ruled by oligarchs that are only concerned with making more money. Right? That's capitalism. And when you have unchecked, unfettered capitalism, this is what happens. And I think something that you said, and I don't even know if you realize it, you started talking about the middle class and then ended talking about the working class. And I'd like
Right.
to point out also that there is no such thing as the middle class. You are either the ruling class or your labor. You are
Yeah.
either the top 1% or you are everybody else.
Yeah.
This idea of the middle class was literally created to keep the working class divided. I'm not as poor as everybody else, right? So I'm doing a little bit better than they are. So we're different, even though we're all exploited labor. And that all comes back to how they were able to utilize that throughout the course of United States history to slowly raise the temperature of the water so
Mhm.
that we didn't realize that this division that we have allowed the top 1% to create amongst everybody else, the labor and working class in the United States, has been done for the strict purpose of moving us away from a democratic run country and into an authoritarian state.
Coming from a military background, for the people who say, what's the big deal? They're fighting crime. Why is this a big deal?
The United States military is not trained or equipped to be law enforcement. When I was in Iraq and Afghanistan, I wasn't arresting people. I was detaining people that we determined were combatants against the United States that were, working for the enemy of the United States at the time, right? But we weren't enforcing the laws. That's not our mission. It's never been our mission. And the founding fathers understood that that could never be the mission because that is a very slippery slope to an all-out monarchy, which is what they had just left. This whole idea of the military being used to support federal law enforcement domestically, it's dangerous and it's upsetting.
In the military, you were talking about detaining combatants.
Mhm.
I worry about the idea that if you have military in the streets of American cities, does the population suddenly start to look like enemy combatants? Because I certainly feel as a civilian that if I'm seeing military, I'm starting to feel like occupied territory.
We are.
Where do you feel there's a danger in the roles of our military and our civilians starting to blur so that the American people start looking like the enemy?
100%. And we've already seen that blurring of the line escalate, right? From LA to DC. LA, it was about these protesters who were destroying property, and we needed to use the military to get control of the city again. In DC, they're arresting people that are homeless, that are unhoused. They're arresting people that are smoking on the sidewalk, right? So we've already seen that blurring of the line between a citizen of the United States and combatant or enemy of the United States, just in the way that we're handling these two very similar and yet completely different situations.
Mom, I want to turn to you for a second because we talked about this idea of, you know, there's kindling being added and it's just going to take a match and
Right.
something could explode. You know, you lived during a very tumultuous era in American politics where the National Guard was called out. There were battles between campus protesters and law enforcement and the National Guard.
Right.
Tell me what your experience of seeing that throughout the history and what worries you most about this moment.
Well, when I was in college in the 60s, they sent National Guard into Watts in Los Angeles, which is a black neighborhood. And there had been some riots because the police, as usual at that time, were just terrible in those neighborhoods. They were already an occupying army. And they introduced the National Guard. And I think between the cops and the National Guard, they killed 23 people. There were incidents, as I recall, where somebody felt like they were being shot at, and they might have been shot at by one of their own number. They might have been it might have been a firecracker going off. Nobody really knows, and they just opened fire. And then at Kent State, of course, there were campus protests, and the governor, who was in a tight race for primary, brought the National Guard in, even though everyone told him not to. And they were just not trained. Like you were saying, Matt, that never was their mission. They weren't trained. And some couple of demonstrators started to throw rocks at them. And they had been instructed to shoot over the heads of the demonstrators, but they couldn't hear anything because they had gas masks on, because they were also lobbing tear gas at the demonstrators. They didn't hear. All they heard was fire. And so somebody in the National Guard started shooting. And they killed 4 students and wounded a whole lot more. It just took one match. Troops that were scared, troops that were looking at them as enemies, and somebody throwing a rock, and somebody with an itchy trigger finger, and they just fired, and they killed all of those kids. And I think that actually is part of the plan. I think part of the plan is to escalate and escalate. In DC, they're giving tickets for traffic. They're turning into cops. And so next city, what's going to happen? They're going to go into cities and just decide who's a criminal and who's not. And then all of a sudden, we have a genuine powder keg that's going to explode. And that's the pretext for martial law. That's what my fear is. That, like you said, they're getting us used to it. They're turning it up a little by little. And I would like to get inside the head of a Marine who's deployed to an American city and has a brain and knows that the people that he's supposed to be arresting are just American citizens. They're not enemies. How do you think about what your mission is? Do you just follow orders no matter what? Do you say at a certain point, like some of the National Guard were saying, we're not going to do it?
In the military, you have an obligation under the Uniform Code of Military Justice to ignore unlawful orders.
Ah,
Now, it's tricky, right? Because then the question is, well, what is an unlawful order? right?
Right.
You can't expect an 18-year-old who just signed up for the Marine Corps to know constitutional law and if an order being given to him is violating the Constitution or civil liberties or not. And so the rank and file of the military are leaning on their upper leadership
Right.
to say, hey, this is unlawful. We're not doing it. But if that doesn't happen, which was something that I pointed out right when Donald Trump got elected, one of the first things he did after inauguration day was he fired a ton of JAG attorneys from the Department of Defense whose job was to interpret orders'
Right.
lawfulness or unlawfulness. They just got rid of them. And I said that was going to be a problem. And this is where it starts being a problem because, like I said, the rank and file of the military aren't legal scholars. They don't know the Constitution. They're not, they don't have the law textbooks in front of them. So they're relying on people from the top down to say if something is illegal or not and not to do it. But if the order is coming from the top, what do
Right.
you do?
Yeah, this is also why, of course, Donald Trump selected Pete Hegseth to be
Hmm.
the Secretary of Defense because he values loyalty above competency. And I want to expand this story out a bit because I don't think the DC takeover is a separate story from what they're doing with ICE. Just the other day, maybe today, the head of the police in Washington, D.C. announced that they're going to be cooperating with ICE more. You saw ICE people deployed right outside of this speech that Gavin Newsom was delivering, almost like federal agents, being this intimidating force. You've got Donald Trump is picking on the most vulnerable people and the most hated people in America, quote unquote, illegal immigrants and criminals, right?
Hmm.
But it doesn't stop there. And the ICE force and the takeover of Washington, D.C. are all part of the same authoritarian push.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And, you can go to the fact that part of the reason that Marines were sent to Los Angeles was because of the protests surrounding the ICE raids that were happening there. And so they were there to ensure the safety of federal buildings, officially, is what they were saying. But we all know that the reason that they were there was because they were there to provide security for ICE. On top of that, the Department of Defense said that they were going to start attaching Marines to ICE raids that were happening in Louisiana and Florida. On top of that, they were going to start putting ICE agents as base security for 4 different Marine Corps bases, pulling Marines off of entry checkpoints onto military installations. On top of that, the big stupid bill that just passed gave Immigration and Customs Enforcement a budget 3 times larger than the United States Marine Corps' budget. None of this is existing in a vacuum. All of this is connected together. And, people will be like, tinfoil hats, and you've got red lines going behind you and you're connecting dots. Like, no, we're just paying attention, right?
Yeah.
Nothing exists independently of itself in this day and age. Everything is connected. And so when you start seeing that escalation from LA to Louisiana and Florida to the passing of this huge budget for ICE to putting ICE agents on Marine Corps bases as entry checkpoint guards to the military being deployed into American cities, it's all linked together.
Yeah, and what concerns me, you've seen this big push for new ICE agents, and clearly they're having trouble
Mhm.
recruiting folks because they're giving, huge signing bonuses. There's propaganda everywhere. And it feels like the only people that they're going to be able to find for this force are either going to be true believers,
Mhm.
which ties into the whole loyalty piece, and the institution starts being filled by people who are loyalists at the expense of merit. And then so you've got the people who are true believers, and the rest of them are probably ill-equipped to be doing that job. That combination of loyalty and skill
Competence.
competence. Yeah, talk to me, Mom. Loyalty combined with incompetence seems like a bad combination.
Loyalty and incompetence means that the republic is in severe decline. I mean, what happened in Soviet Union was always loyalty over competence. Brown nosing over everything else, and party officials were never the best. They were always the best connected. And if you are replacing competence with stooges, then you're not going to have a functioning government pretty soon, which is partially part of the plan because Americans don't like government anyway. They always think it's full of waste and fraud and abuse, which, having been in the federal and state governments, I can tell you, and in corporate America, I would say that governments tend to be run much better than corporations, actually. And that people who are in government because they want to be in government service are amazingly competent and work really, really hard and could make much more in the private sector, but for various reasons they work in the government. You're way better off with merit. But when you start putting incompetent people in, you're going to witness the decline of the republic because nothing is going to work, which of course makes it much easier for the oligarchs and the dictator to rule. And also it gives them someone to blame.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we've been talking about this frog in the boiling pot of water being slowly turned up. I think recognizing how hot it's gotten requires you to look back a little bit. If you said to someone a year ago, in August of 2025, Donald Trump is going to have military on the streets of America, you would realize it's pretty hot. And he's actually turning it up faster, I think, than, normally you're supposed to turn it up pretty slowly so you don't recognize the rise in temperature. I think he's turning it up really fast, and we're realizing that rise in temperature. But I want to talk back up a little bit in terms of how we got here. You've seen a lot of capitulation to Trump.
Yeah.
My mom used to read me a book when I was young. It was called If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. Are you familiar with that book,
Oh, yeah.
Matt?
Oh, yeah. Yep. I think everybody read that book to their kids.
Yeah, apparently there's some people that really need to read that book because what we've seen is that the press has capitulated. I mean, Donald Trump's in the Smithsonian trying to have them change what they've got to accord with his perspective of American history. We're letting Donald Trump take our cookie, and he's going to want milk, and the milk is essentially American democracy. Obviously, D.C. is a city that has a unique relationship to the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
But do you see this ending here in D.C.?
No. D.C.'s the second city.
Yes, right. He was in Los Angeles already. And, he had a pretext in Los Angeles, which is, these riots. There's no pretext in Washington, D.C. Crime is down.
Right.
I guess all they needed was big balls to get jumped by a couple of teenagers before they sent in the National Guard. We've had this hysteria over crime narrative that's gone. I mean, it's old. Donald Trump started his career, demonizing 5 later proven to be innocent children of committing this horrible crime and calling for the death penalty against them. So he's in his wheelhouse right now with hysteria on crime. But the fake news narrative is part of this because people say, hey, crime is at a 30-year low in 2024, and it's dropped 35% since then in 2025. It makes no sense that you're doing this. But they just say fake news. And, he can get away with that because he's been turning up the temperature on that pot for a long time. And you've had news organizations capitulate. And so the point is that it's time to stop letting Donald Trump get away with taking this cookie. Not capitulating, I think, has to be the name of the game right now.
Tell the truth. That's the first thing. Just tell the truth over and over and over again. And just say no. I mean, if all you do is write a letter to the editor that's something. If all you do is can get out and march somewhere with a sign, that's something. If all you can do is give $5 to AOC, that's something. But you have to do something. You can't do nothing. And if all the people did one little something, that would be millions and millions of people doing one little something. And get your head out of your ass. I mean, one thing that we talked about in the 50s that they think woke right now is some new concept that they use against liberals. We were talking about it in the 50s. We kept saying, wake up, America. Your country is being stolen from you right under your nose. And you know what? It's still true. And you know what? Too many people are still asleep. And you really need to wake up before it's too late. Because as you said, William, the temperature is getting really, really hot.
Yeah, I want to pause here for a minute because I'm just sort of fascinated by the lessons that you've learned in an inverse way. You know what I mean? Like, because in the 50s, you're afraid of communism doing all these things, but you were supporting the anti-communist movement who were actually taking the books out of the shelves. You
Right.
were supporting the anti-communist movement who was wanting to arrest their political enemies. It turned out it was the fascist capitalists that were really doing the things that you were afraid the communists were going to do. And I say that because they're calling Zohran Mamdani a communist because he wants to, give people free buses. When really this has all been in service of the unfettered capitalist system that they want to promote. Yeah, I just want you to reflect on the irony of learning those lessons, in the opposite direction, sort of.
Here's the biggest secret of all. The Republican Party has never been a fan of democracy. From the time that I was a Republican, we would have taken books out of the library. If you were a professor spouting liberal views, we would have had you arrested. We would have had you silenced. We would have had your neighbors spying on you. Why? Because the Republic was in peril and then everything was okay. We would have thrown out and burned the Constitution in order to save it. And that's always been true. I don't care what you say. There have been some good Republicans. I voted for some of them. But really, at their heart, they don't care about democracy. It gets in the way of making money. It was when they figured that out and that they could manipulate people's opinions, their fears, their ignorance, the fact that they don't pay attention most of the time. When they figured out how to manipulate that, that's when America started to change and the working class started to move toward the Republicans. It was a matter of time before they figured it out. America is becoming the worst of Russia. And Russia, which used to be supposedly for the workers, is becoming the worst of America, a complete oligarchy.
Well, the other thing I want to point out, we're just doing a little detour into history, but that's what we do on this show. That time where you were an anti-communist fanatic, you were in a minority is the thing, though. You had a lot of crazy things going on with McCarthy, but that anti-communist, sort of semi-fascist movement couldn't coalesce because, you know what? The Democratic Party at the time was still riding high off the successes of the New Deal, and there weren't enough people who were willing to join that movement because they were much more interested in the material benefits that they were getting from a Democratic Party that was frankly a social democracy at the time. And so I say that because I want to point out that anyone who's on the anti-Trump coalition, whether you're a Democrat or a leftist or whatever, is on the defense right now. But I think that we do need to start shifting our focus into the offense and start making that proactive pitch for like a completely different narrative and a different vision for America. And it seems like a side quest when you've got military in the streets, but I actually think it's the kind of thing, you can say you want to deal with crime. I have an answer for dealing with crime. Give people health care, give people a living wage. While we're on defense, can we shift into an offensive, proactive agenda message for the American people, an alternative?
Yes, and we have to. Kathy Hochul came out last week and was like, we're in a war for our democracy. And I've been screaming like, okay, well, if we're in a war, you don't wait for the other side to strike first.
Right.
You press the attack, right? There is a time to be on defense and hold your ground and hold the line. But that's not this time. That's not right now. I'm kind of tired of always being, reacting to what the Republicans and conservatives in this country are doing, when we should be taking what should be happening is, what Gavin Newsom did today, like we're putting it to a vote to put new maps in. Kathy Hochul here in New York needs to do the same thing and say, we do not like partisan gerrymandering, but this is the system that we're playing in right now. These are the rules of the game that you all have set up. So we are going to use those rules against you and come out on top so that we can change those rules for the better. That's the only way that we come out of this on top. That's the only way that anything that would be recognizable as the United States of America survives, is if we stop taking the high road all the time. Stop waiting for them to be like, oh man, they just punched me in the face. Now I have to do something. Maybe don't let them punch you in the face.
I vote for Matt for president.
I'll take a Secretary of Defense position.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, people in the comments have been saying "mom for president" for a long time, and we need to, Matt will be in your cabinet, Mom.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, perfect.
All right, I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up. Mom, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share before we let Matt go back to his life?
You can't go back to your life, Matt. You're in charge now.
Apparently. Yeah.
Yeah. You got to get those Marines all organized. The thing I got to say is, like you said, Will, when I was a little right-wing nut job, we were in the minority because there was a strong Democratic Party that knew who it was. They knew which side they were on, and they don't know what side they're on anymore. And I've had it with that. Enough. If they don't shape up, we got to take it to them and get ourselves leaders that understand, like there has to be a brand new coalition that cuts across everything and restores a democracy and not an oligarchy, which is what we have now. And we can do it. We can do it. We're Americans. Americans hate to be bossed around. Some people like to be led through by the nose. What can you say? They're sheep. But Americans, they don't like that. And we have to understand it. And that's like, I think every time William and I talk, I'm like, we're not sheep. We're never going to be sheep. We're Americans. Don't push us around. So I'm signing Matt up right now.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining us. Matt, can you tell people where they can find you? Where do you want people to follow you?
Yeah, so on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Blue Sky, it's USMC Angry Veteran. I'm not on Twitter or anything anymore because I don't support Nazis. But that's my thing. I do have a Substack also that I'm gonna start actually using. So
thank you so much, Matt, for joining us. It was a real pleasure having you. Thank you, Mom. I love you. I'll talk to you soon.
Love you.
Mwah.
Bye.
Thank you all so much for watching, and a very special thank you to Matt for joining us and being the first guest on our podcast. Please make sure to follow him. His links are in the description. And if you're getting something out of what we're doing here, please like, subscribe, tell us what you think in the comments. And remember, we have a Patreon where you can get early access to our videos, bonus content, and just generally help support what we're doing here. It would mean the world to us if you would consider contributing. Thank you all. We love you. See you next time.